a town that never made the news, until a storm came and swept more than just water through its streets. In the silence after the rain, a boy heard something no one else did, a cry too small to matter unless you were the one who answered it. This isn't just a story about a kitten. It's about what happens when one act of kindness stirs a whole community. If you believe small hearts can change the world, subscribe and stay with us, this story will stay with you long after it ends. The spring storms had arrived early in Millersville, a small town nestled among the moss-covered forests of western Oregon. Dark clouds loomed low over the pine-lined hills, and a steady rain had been falling for 2 days straight, turning the dirt roads to mud and swelling the Cedar River beyond its banks. The air was thick with the smell of wet bark and earth, and the sky had taken on the gray-green hue of steel just before it bends. The storm hadn't let up, and the old wooden bridge over Cedar Creek was barely visible through the curtain of rain. 12-year-old Evan Moore stood near the edge of the tree line, his sneakers soaked through and his hood drooping over his dark brown hair. Evan was small for his age, wiry and quiet, with wide eyes that noticed more than he let on. His mother often said he had a listening soul. Unlike other kids who filled their days with loud games, Evan wandered alone more often than not, always drawn to the edges of things, the forgotten trails behind the school, the silence of the old junkyard, the rusted tracks near the warehouse by the river. Evan wasn't out exploring today, though. He was searching for his dog, Rusty. Rusty was a mutt with some beagle in him, always chasing scents where he shouldn't, and this morning he had slipped out during the thundertail between his legs. Evan had tried calling, whistling, even offering jerky by the back porch, but the dog was nowhere to be found. The path near the old mill warehouse was slick and uneven, but Evan knew it well. He had discovered it years ago with his father, back before his dad had joined a construction job out in Montana and never really returned. Now, it was just him and Mom, and Evan had stopped asking when Dad would come back. As Evan approached the bend near the warehouse, the wind kicked up, pushing the rain sideways. He pulled his soaked hoodie tighter and took another cautious step when a sound froze him in place. A cry, high-pitched, sharp, repeated. It wasn't a bark, it was something else. Meow, ow, ow. Evan's breath caught in his throat. He followed the sound, now more insistent, until he reached the rusted fence that bordered the riverbank. The Cedar River had overflowed, and the brush along the edge was half submerged in brown, rushing water. Tangled in that brush, just past a stretch of barbed wire, someone had once coiled. As a barrier was a tiny figure, a kitten, soaked, shivering, and stuck. The kitten's fur, though plastered to its skin by the rain, was a soft, smoky gray with flecks of white on the paws and chest. It couldn't have been more than a few months old. One leg was caught in the barbed wire, and every time it tried to move, the sharp metal dug deeper. Blood mixed with the rainwater, and the cries turned hoarse. Evan dropped to his knees, heart hammering. The wire was twisted and tangled around a half-rotted fence post that had collapsed. The current of the river licked closer and closer. He looked around. No one. Just the steady drum of rain and the roar of water. He wanted to run and get help, but help was far, and the kitten didn't have time. He stepped into the shallows. The cold hit instantly biting into his legs, but Evan kept going, grabbing a long branch from the side of the path to balance himself as he edged closer to the trapped animal. "Hey, it's okay. I'm here," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the storm. The kitten hissed, then cried again. "Shh, I won't hurt you." He crouched low, one foot slipping on a submerged rock. The barbed wire was tightly wound, and with every second the current seemed to grow stronger. His fingers trembled as he tried to pry the wire loose, but it was slick, and the kitten cried out again. He almost gave up, but then he remembered something. It was a story his mother had once told him about how she rescued a fox when she was young. She'd said, "Sometimes the only difference between cruelty and kindness is who chooses to stop and listen." Evan kept working his fingers raw. Finally, with a twist and a yank, the wire came free. He scooped the kitten up, clutching it to his chest. It was trembling, its tiny body soaked and limp, but it was alive. He stumbled back up the bank, gasping, slipping in the mud, and finally collapsing just beneath a leaning fir tree. His hands were cut from the wire. The kitten lay nestled against him, no longer crying, just breathing fast and shallow. Evan looked up at the gray sky and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The rain had started to ease. A dog's bark echoed in the distance, high and familiar. Rusty. But Evan didn't move, not yet. For now, he just held the kitten tight. The wind whipped fiercely as Evan trudged up the muddy path, soaked to the bone, and clutching the small, trembling kitten under his hoodie. The weight of responsibility sat heavily on his chest, not just the chill from the rain, but the helpless look the kitten had given him. Its cries had lessened, but Evan could feel its heart fluttering like a trapped bird against his ribs. He needed help. Fast. Rusty's distant barking had faded again, and the flooded path back toward town seemed longer now than ever. The streetlights in Millersville hadn't come on yet, though the gray storm had brought an early dusk. Evan sprinted down Birch Hollow Lane, his shoes squelching, eyes scanning for the first house with light in the window. He turned into the yard of the Darnell house, an old green bungalow with a rickety porch, and banged on the door. Inside, the sound of a TV blaring a game show could be heard. After a few seconds, the door creaked open just enough for a face to peek out. Mrs. Darnell, a short woman in her late 70s with tightly curled white hair and thick glasses, looked out with confusion. Her face, lined with years of both laughter and frowns, bore the permanent shape of suspicion. Mrs. Darnell, please, I need help. There's a cat. It's hurt and stuck down by the river. The water's rising. Evan cried, his voice shaking from cold and urgency. Mrs. Darnell blinked at him through the storm. A cat? In this weather? What are you doing out, child? Where's your mother? She's working the evening shift. Please just call someone. The kitten's leg, it's bleeding and I couldn't get the wire all the way off. She squinted harder, then waved a hand. Go home, sweetie. You'll catch pneumonia. The river's dangerous this time of year. A stray cat's not worth risking your neck. The door closed. Evan stood there stunned. Then he turned and ran. House after house gave the same result. People peeked through windows, waved him off, or simply ignored the knocks. One man, Mr. Baines, the local car repair guy with a beer gut and a voice like gravel, told him flatly, "Boy, you better stop making noise before I call your mama." No one believed him, or maybe they just didn't care. By the time Evan made it back to his small two-bedroom house, the sky had turned nearly black. He burst through the back door, nearly slipping on the linoleum floor. Rusty the muddy beagle mix greeted him with a guilty tail wag from under the table. "There you are," Evan snapped, but he had no time to scold. Mom, his mother, Lynn Moore, emerged from the bedroom, slipping on her nursing scrubs. She was in her late 30s, slender and tall, with tired eyes that still carried a spark of warmth when she wasn't in a rush. Lynn had been a single parent for 4 years, ever since Evan's father had taken a temporary job out of state and eventually stopped answering calls. Life had hardened her, not with bitterness, but with relentless practicality. Love was something she expressed in packed lunches, folded laundry, and staying up after 12-hour shifts to help with homework. "What's wrong?" she asked, alarmed. Evan, panting, held out the kitten now wrapped in a dish towel. "Mom, I found him by the river. He was stuck bleeding. There's wire. I got him out, but I think it's bad. He needs help." Lynn took one look at the trembling bundle, and her nurse instincts kicked in. "Put him on the counter. Get me the first aid kit." She didn't ask why Evan had been near the river or why he was soaking wet. She just moved. Over the next 20 minutes, they worked in silence. Lynn's hands were deft, cleaning the kitten's wounds with antiseptic and gauze, her brows furrowed in concentration. The kitten meowed weakly but didn't fight. Evan held its paw, gently murmuring nonsense to keep it calm. "He's going to need more than this," Lynn finally said. "That leg might be infected. And I don't like the look of that cut on his belly either. He needs a vet. But the clinic's closed by now, and I have to be at the hospital for the night." "I can take him back," Evan whispered. "Tomorrow morning. But he's going to die if we don't get him warm tonight." Lynn looked at her son, and in his mud-caked clothes and trembling arms saw something different. A fire she hadn't seen since the day he watched his father drive off without saying goodbye. "All right," she said softly. "You can keep him in your room tonight, but if he takes a turn for the worse, we'll have to drive out to Junctionville for the emergency vet." "Thank you," Evan breathed. Before heading out, Lynn stuffed an old flashlight and coil of nylon rope into Evan's backpack. "Just in case you go back," she said. "But you're not going alone again, do you understand?" Evan nodded, but deep down, he knew what he would do if no one came with him. That night after Lynn left for her shift, Evan lay in bed with the kitten curled beside him on a nest of towels under a desk lamp for warmth. He had named it Pico after the mountain in his science textbook, the one that stood alone above the clouds. Pico's breathing had slowed, and the little cat was now sleeping with its nose tucked under its paw. But Evan couldn't sleep. The image of that barbed wire twisted and dark against the flood-swollen river stayed in his mind. He had seen another section farther downstream, half buried in reeds. What if there were more animals? What if tomorrow the water was even higher? He pulled out the flashlight, checked the rope, and then he made his decision. By dawn, the storm had thinned into a fine mist, and the sky above Millersville glowed with a dull pewter light. The Cedar River, however, had not calmed. Its waters churned with silt and debris swollen beyond their banks, submerging shrubs and creeping dangerously close to the foundations of the old warehouse at the town's edge. Evan stood at the edge of the overgrown trail, the hem of his jeans already soaked, gripping the flashlight in one hand and a coil of rope in the other. A backpack bounced lightly against his shoulders with a towel, first aid kit, and a pouch of dry food tucked inside. Beside him, Pico mewed weakly from the pocket of Evan's raincoat, his tiny body trembling, but eyes alert. The kitten's leg was wrapped neatly in gauze from the night before, though the swelling had not gone down. Evan hadn't told his mom where he was going. He didn't want her to worry, or worse, stop him. He had left a note under her mug just in case. Evan pushed through the wet brush toward the place where he had found Pico. As he reached the bend near the river, the current's roar returned full force. But it wasn't just that there was movement beyond the trees, a figure approaching through the mist. At first Evan froze. Then a voice called out soft and clear. "Evan, is that you?" He turned startled to see Ms. Leona Carter, wrapped in a faded red raincoat with paint stains near the cuffs. She carried a black umbrella under one arm and a worn leather satchel slung across her chest. Leona was in her early 60s, tall and angular, with steel-gray hair swept into a bun that looked like it had been hurriedly pinned. Her eyes were sharp observant, with a flicker of warmth that rarely faded. In town, she was known for her art classes and her strange habit of sketching people without asking. Children loved her. Adults found her eccentric. Evan blinked. "Ms. Carter, what are you doing here? I might ask you the same thing," she replied, stepping forward. Her boots squelched in the mud. "Saw you sneaking off this morning from my front window. You walked past the hedge with that storm face of yours, determined, a little reckless." I recognized it. That's the same face I wore when I climbed the water tower in high school, just to prove a point. Evan looked away. "I'm fine. I just came back to check on the river." Leona raised an eyebrow, then glanced down. Pico poked his head from Evan's coat. "Well, she said crouching, that explains it." "So, this is the famous survivor." She reached out slowly, letting Pico sniff her fingers. "He's got a strong heart to have lasted through all that." "I'm worried there might be more," Evan said, suddenly serious. "I saw more wire down that way yesterday, and animals could have been swept in with the flood." Leona straightened, studying the muddy trail. "And you were going to check that all by yourself?" Evan nodded. "I have a rope and food. I'll be careful." Leona was silent for a moment, then sighed. "You remind me of my brother when we were kids, always charging ahead, heart first, brain second. He once tried to rescue a cow stuck in a snowdrift with nothing but a hairbrush and a prayer. Broke his wrist, but saved the cow." She pulled the strap of her satchel tighter. "Let's go then." Evan blinked. "You're coming with me?" She grinned. "Well, someone's got to take pictures in case we end up heroes." As they moved along the trail, the river's growl grew louder. Fallen branches and torn signs marked the aftermath of the storm. They stopped near the old spillway, a half-collapsed concrete slope where the river split briefly into a narrow offshoot. "There," Evan said, pointing. A twisted mess of barbed wire jutted from the muddy embankment. Beneath it, movement barely noticeable stirred in the reeds. Leona handed Evan the rope. "Anchor it to that tree. I'll watch your back." Evan nodded, tied the rope around a thick pine trunk, and descended carefully into the muddy slope. The kitten remained in Leona's arms, wrapped snug in her coat. As Evan reached the wire, his eyes confirmed it, another animal. This time, not a kitten, but a young raccoon, drenched and half-buried, one leg caught in the snare. Its fur was mottled gray, and black eyes glassy with exhaustion. "I see him," Evan called. "He's alive." "Be gentle," Leona warned. "He's wild, he'll be scared." Evan worked quickly, remembering what he'd done with Pico. This wire was worse, tighter, embedded deeper. The raccoon hissed, tried to pull away, but lacked the strength. It took 5 long minutes, muddy hands, and a makeshift brace fashioned from a pencil in Evan's pocket before the wire finally snapped loose. Evan cradled the animal carefully and scrambled back up the bank. Leona laid her coat on the grass, and they wrapped the raccoon in it, keeping his head free. "You've done good, Evan," she said softly. "Better than most grown-ups would have." He looked up at her, the words meaning more than he could say. Back in town, sirens echoed faintly, emergency crews checking flooded areas. But on this quiet edge of Millersville, a boy and a retired art teacher had quietly rewritten the meaning of ordinary. As they started back toward the trail, Pico let out a soft mew. Leona looked at Evan and smiled. "You gave him a name, yet Pico." Evan said, pride in his voice. "Strong name. For a strong heart." The clouds had begun to part by midday, letting slivers of pale sunlight spill across Millersville like a silent blessing. But near the riverbank, the aftermath of the storm was still palpable. Mud caked the underbrush, branches hung broken like tired limbs, and the Cedar River remained a restless brown ribbon, foaming and snarling along its swollen edges. Evan and Ms. Leona had just returned from the spillway, the young raccoon now safely resting in a covered crate lent to them by a kind neighbor who had once run a pet store. But Pico wasn't faring as well. Evan cradled the kitten in his arms as they walked the trail homeward. The warm weight of him, once a comfort, now seemed heavier with every step. The makeshift gauze on his leg had begun to bleed through the cut from the barbed wire deeper than they'd initially believed. The kitten no longer mewed. His head rested limply in the crook of Evan's elbow, breath shallow and tremulous. "We have to do something," Evan said, voice shaking. "He's getting worse." Leona, normally calm and quick-witted, looked genuinely troubled. Her long strides had slowed, her hands twitching restlessly at her satchel strap. "I know," she said. "We don't have time to wait. The town vet's still closed because of flooding, and the one in Junctionville is 40 minutes away," Evan finished. "He won't make it." They paused at the bench near the trail's end, a spot overlooking the lower stretch of Cedar Creek. Leona pulled out a thermos of chamomile tea and poured a few sips into the lid, offering it to Evan. He didn't take it. His eyes were on Pico. Then Leona stood and did something Evan didn't expect. She pulled out her phone, tapped the camera, and began taking photos of Pico, close-ups of his injured leg, his small, limp frame, the sodden bandages. She adjusted the lighting, with a painter's eye moving quietly and precisely. Evan blinked. "Why are you—" Leona didn't look up. "Because I know what the internet does with a good image." 10 minutes later, they were seated in Leona's art studio, a wide sunlit back room of her cottage filled with canvases, drying brushes, a wall of student paintings, and shelves stacked with books on color theory and psychology. The place smelled of turpentine, lavender oil, and dust. Leona placed Pico gently in a shallow basket lined with fleece, setting him on the corner table by the radiator. Her laptop was already open. "I don't do Facebook," she muttered, typing with surprising speed for someone her age. "But my niece got me on something called Pet Help and Next Town. They post animal rescues. People respond." She uploaded the photos with a simple caption: "Urgent local boy, saved kitten from barbed wire after storm. Severe injury. No vet available. Needs immediate help or transport. Please share or respond." Evan stood nearby, silent hands still muddy, his jaw clenched in a way that made him look older than 12. Within minutes, comments and shares began trickling in. Then a private message popped up on the screen. "User Green River Rescue. Where are you located? We have a mobile vet team in the area helping with flood recoveries. We can send someone." Leona gasped. "They're real. They're based out of Salem. I'd forgotten they do field work during storms." Evan leaned in. "Will they come here?" Leona typed furiously, gave directions, and received a simple response. "On our way, ETA 40 mins." The time stretched thin as a whisper. To distract themselves, Leona showed Evan her old student portfolio's drawings of wild animals made by children over the years. Evan's attention lingered on one, done in soft pastel, a mountain lion perched on a cliff edge, its eyes wide with sadness. That one, Leona said gently, was drawn by a girl named Sadie. She barely spoke when she came to class. Her brother died in a car accident. But when she finished that picture, she said, "I think this cat is also waiting for someone who isn't coming back." Evan said nothing. His eyes welled up. He thought of his father, how even when he'd called every week, there had always been something in his voice that sounded like distance. Then one day, the phone just didn't ring again. Leona didn't press him. She simply placed a hand on his shoulder. Some wounds, she said, don't bleed. Doesn't mean they aren't real. A sharp knock at the front door broke the silence. Outside stood a woman in waterproof coveralls, her red hair pulled into a tight braid, clipboard in hand. Her name tag read, Dr. Sarah Kim, Mobile Vet Unit. She was in her early 40s, lean and upright with a no-nonsense air and a soothing voice. Her eyes were intelligent, calculating, but not unkind eyes that had seen too much loss and still managed to search for what could be saved. "Which one's Pico?" she asked the moment she stepped in. Leona pointed. "Over there." Sarah crouched, opening her kit with swift precision. She inspected the leg, felt Pico's ribs, listened to his breathing, and nodded slowly. "He's got fight left," she said. "But we need to act now. Infection started, and the wire tore through muscle. I can sedate him and do field stitching here, but he'll need rest and antibiotics for days." "Do it," Evan said without hesitation. Over the next 30 minutes, they worked silently. Sarah administered fluids and carefully cleaned the wound, while Leona helped hold the light steady. Evan knelt nearby, holding Pico's tiny paw between two fingers, whispering stories from school, favorite animal facts, things he never told anyone else. Pico slept, breathing easier under sedation. Finally, Sarah looked up, wiping her gloves. "He's going to be okay." Evan blinked rapidly. "Really?" she smiled. "He's lucky, not just because he survived that river, but because he found you." By the next morning, the sky over Millersville had cleared into a soft, gentle blue, the kind of post-storm calm that made the damage left behind feel both solemn and surreal. The Cedar River had receded slightly, but patches of land remained waterlogged and mud coated the lower streets. Debris was scattered across driveways and porches, fallen limbs, garbage bins, even the occasional patio chair. Inside Leona's cottage, Pico lay curled in his basket, his side gently rising and falling. The antibiotics from Dr. Sarah Kim were working, and though the kitten hadn't regained full energy, his breathing had steadied. Evan sat beside him, drawing quietly in a sketchbook Leona had given him the night before. On the page, the lines of a raccoon and a kitten stood together, backs to the river, framed by a giant oak tree. Leona entered the room, holding her phone, her silver bun slightly unraveled, and her expression unreadable. She was dressed in one of her old denim shirts splattered with dried cerulean blue paint, and her face wore a tired but electric focus. "They saw it," she said simply. "Who did—" Evan looked up, pencil frozen in mid-stroke. "Everyone," she said, handing him the phone. The post about Pico, just a single paragraph and a few raw photos, had gone viral within Millersville's online circles. There were over 300 shares and dozens of comments. People had tagged their neighbors, their cousins, even the mayor. Just then, a loud knock rattled the front door. Leona opened it to reveal a tall man in his early 30s, wearing a damp fire department jacket, a neon vest slung over one arm. His name patch read Troy McGraw. His short auburn hair stuck to his forehead, and his boots were caked in dried mud. Despite the wear of the past few days, he stood upright with the calm and confidence of someone used to crisis. "Ms. Carter?" he asked. His voice was smooth and solid with the slight drawl of a local. "Name's Troy, Millersville Station 7. We saw your post about the animals. Just wanted to say, we're in." "In," Evan echoed, stepping up beside Leona. Troy smiled. "My crew and I were doing door-to-door damage checks, but we've already pulled 2 stray dogs out of a collapsed garage and found an owl tangled in netting near the water plant. You're not the only ones finding animals in bad shape." He stepped aside, revealing a canvas-covered trailer filled with cages, blankets, and makeshift carriers. In the back seat of his fire truck, 2 firefighters were organizing supplies. "You set this up?" Leona asked, half impressed, half skeptical. "Nah. My fiance's a vet tech. She helped us coordinate. But it was your post that lit the fire. Everyone thought the flood was done hurting things. You showed them it wasn't." Just as Leona was about to reply, a small group of kids came running down the sidewalk, carrying backpacks and sketch pads. One girl waved excitedly. Her name was Gracie Lopez, a 10-year-old with round glasses and a wild ponytail of frizzy black curls. She used to be in Leona's summer art camp before her family moved 2 blocks over to care for her grandfather. Ms. Leona Gracie called, panting. "I brought my sketch club." Behind her trailed 3 other children, all clutching papers and pencils. The smallest, a boy named Caleb, held a sign he had clearly made himself, "Help the river animals," in bright orange crayon. Leona blinked. "What is this?" Gracie beamed. "We want to draw the animals so people care more. And sell the drawings to raise money for blankets and pet food." Evan grinned in disbelief. "You guys really showed up." Troy chuckled. "Looks like you're running an unofficial rescue center now, ma'am." Within an hour, the front yard had transformed. Neighbors began stopping by with old pet crates, towels, and food bowls. A woman named Donna Perkins, who ran the Millersville Deli, brought warm biscuits and ham sandwiches. Donna was in her late 40s, sturdy with kind eyes and hands that always smelled of flour. She had lost her dog last year and hadn't stopped by Leona's in over a decade. "I can't do much," she said, placing the food on a folding table, "but I can feed the helpers." Later that afternoon, a teenage boy named Liam Tran arrived with a drone camera. He was 15 tall and lanky, with headphones always around his neck and a shy smile. He offered to fly over the woods and riverbanks to spot any trapped animals from above. "It's got a heat sensor," he explained, fidgeting with the controls. "Used it for science fair last fall." Evan watched the screen as Liam launched the drone. The image glided smoothly over Cedar Creek, scanning reeds and thickets. Occasionally, red blips flickered small mammals huddled in isolated spots, some limping, others just still. 3 spots, Liam reported. Maybe more. By nightfall, the entire town seemed to have shifted in tone. What started as one boy's desperate act had become something larger, a hum of movement and care that pulsed through Millersville's quiet streets. People who hadn't spoken in months were now passing crates over fences, fixing makeshift shelters, or just checking in on each other. Even Mayor Walters showed up briefly in his signature navy coat and rain-stained loafers. A portly man in his 60s with a walrus mustache, he spent less than 10 minutes at the site, but promised to allocate town funds for animal rescue efforts. Leona didn't believe him, but she smiled anyway. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Evan sat beside Pico again. The kitten was stronger now. He even attempted a half-hearted purr when Evan stroked behind his ear. The other animals rescued that day rested in crates nearby, each with a name written in Sharpie on the side, Birch Willow Skipper. "I didn't think people would care," Evan whispered. Leona, sitting beside him with a mug of tea, watched the soft golden light strung across her porch flicker on. "Sometimes," she said, "it just takes one loud enough whisper to wake up a sleeping town." The morning sun filtered gently through the pine canopies, casting dappled shadows across the Cedar riverbank. Though the floodwaters had continued to retreat, the land still bore the scars of the storm, gouged earth-snapped roots and glistening debris half buried in the silt. The air was thick with the scent of wet bark, iron-rich soil, and the faint sweetness of spring blossoms stubbornly blooming despite the chaos. Word of the rescue effort had spread like wildfire. By mid-morning, dozens of townsfolk stood at the edge of the embankment, boots muddy sleeves, rolled-up eyes trained on the task ahead. They weren't emergency responders or trained rescuers. They were bakers, students, teachers, cashiers, ordinary people summoned by something deeper than obligation hope. The plan was simple in theory, complex in execution. A new animal had been spotted from Liam's drone footage, a dog medium-sized tan with white markings trapped halfway beneath a fallen log, tangled in fencing wire near the south bend of the Cedar. Judging by the images, the animal had likely been stranded there since the storm's peak. No one could understand how it had survived this long. Troy McGraw took command. The firefighter stood tall at the river's edge, gesturing with calm precision. "We're going to form a human chain," he said, voice raised over the river's chatter. "We anchor the line here." He pointed to a massive oak tree whose roots jutted like fingers into the soil, 2 people at a time in the water. The rest feed them supplies. Leona Carter, in her usual paint-stained coat, had a digital camera slung around her neck. But today she wasn't here to observe, she was here to act. She handed out gloves and looped towels, her voice brisk and firm. "No heroics. We pull together or not at all." Evan stood beside her face, pale but determined. He was dressed in borrowed waders, far too large for his slender frame, cinched at the waist with a rope. His hair was still damp from bathing Pico earlier that morning, and he clutched a carabiner in one hand, like it was sacred. "I want to help down there," he said. Leona looked at him for a long moment. Only after the first pull. "Let Troy lead, you anchor." Evan nodded. Troy's team led the descent. The first into the water was Troy himself and a woman named Mara Hastings, a local post office worker with a surprisingly athletic build. She was in her late 30s, tall, and freckled, her red hair pulled into a tight braid under a utility cap. Known around town for delivering mail on foot even in the worst snow, Mara was tough, methodical, and didn't waste words. As they reached the trapped dog, Evan watched anxiously from above. The dog, a shepherd mix with soulful amber eyes and a notched ear, lifted its head weakly, but didn't bark. It was too tired. The fencing wire was embedded around its back leg and torso, partially hidden under branches. "We're going to name him Logan," someone said, behind Evan. He turned to see Gracie Lopez holding a sketch pad. Her little group of artists was sketching again, this time drawing the rescue in real time. She smiled. "It means Little Hollow, like a hidden place that survives storms." Troy signaled and the line tightened. The crowd grew silent. Every movement in the river seemed louder, rustling limbs, creaking wire water, lapping at thighs. Slowly, carefully, Troy cut through the fencing, using bolt cutters handed down through the human chain. Mara held Logan's head, whispering softly. Her expression, though stoic, was tinged with something almost paternal. Suddenly, Logan yelped. The fencing jerked. Troy shouted something they couldn't hear what, and Evan stepped forward on instinct, only to be caught by Leona's arm. "Wait," she said. It felt like forever. Then Troy stood up, water to his waist, holding Logan in his arms. The crowd erupted, cheers mixed with relieved tears. Sarah Kim, the mobile vet, rushed forward from the edge where she had been preparing a warm blanket and field kit. She quickly examined Logan as Troy carried him to dry ground. "He's dehydrated, ribs bruised, but he's a miracle," Sarah announced. "No broken bones." He fought hard. Evan dropped to his knees beside the dog, resting a hand gently on Logan's head. The dog blinked at him, gave a quiet huff, then rested. Behind them, the human chain began to disassemble. Mud-covered but triumphant, they helped one another back up the slope. Some people clapped each other on the back. Others just sat in the grass, letting the adrenaline fade. Mara approached Evan as she removed her gloves. "That little guy back at Leona's," she said, "the one you found, he's got a fighter's heart." Evan nodded. "His name's Pico." She smiled. "Well, now he's got a river brother." Later, as people lingered under the soft afternoon sun, Donna from the deli passed out lemonade and apple slices. Liam flew his drone one last sweep, confirming no new heat spots. For now, the known rescues were complete. Logan, wrapped in a quilt, lay beside Pico under the porch shade. They didn't know each other, but their bodies were relaxed in parallel peace, as if knowing they'd both come from the same storm and made it out alive. That night, Leona sat on her porch, legs stretched, sipping tea. Evan sat beside her sketchbook in his lap. The page was half filled with the outline of a boy, a dog, and a cat, all standing before a river at sunset. "They're saying this was a miracle," Leona said softly. "It was," Evan replied. "But not because he survived. No," Evan looked up at her eyes, full of something steady and bright. "Because everyone came." The winds in Millersville had settled into a peaceful hush, like the town was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. On the edge of town, past the grove of sugar maples just beginning to bud, stood Cedar Ridge Animal Clinic, a small brick building with faded green shutters, the paint peeling, but the warmth unmistakable. A carved wooden sign above the door read, "Every life counts." Inside, the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the scent of antiseptic lingered. A woman in dark blue scrubs stood near the surgical prep room, her gloved hands resting lightly on the counter. This was Dr. Rachel Nguyen, the clinic's chief veterinarian. In her late 40s, she was petite with sharp cheekbones, black hair cropped into a no-nonsense bob, and a voice that was both soft and unwavering. Known for her tireless dedication, Rachel had been volunteering in low-income rescue centers before opening Cedar Ridge 10 years ago. Her stern demeanor often made children wary, but to animals and to those who paid attention, she was a lighthouse in the fog. Standing beside her, eyes wide but brave, was Evan. In his arms was Pico, wrapped in a faded yellow blanket. The kitten hadn't made a sound since that morning, but his eyes fluttered open now and then, as if reassuring Evan that he was still fighting. Leona stood slightly behind her, expression unreadable. She had changed into a clean flannel shirt, but the sleeves were still smudged with dirt. In her hand was a notebook where she had written down every symptom, every shift in Pico's behavior. Rachel examined the kitten gently, her brow furrowed. The infection's receded, she murmured, but the muscle damage is worse than it looks. If we don't operate today, he may never walk properly again, if at all. Evan's lips parted, but no words came. I'll do everything I can, Rachel added, placing a hand briefly on Evan's shoulder. Why don't you wait in the back garden? There's a small bench. It's quieter there. The boy nodded and let go of Pico with trembling fingers. Leona followed him out. Behind the clinic, the garden was overgrown, but peaceful with scattered pots of herbs and an old wooden bench shaded by a red-leafed dogwood tree. Evan sat down without speaking. His hands were still curled as if holding Pico. Leona didn't speak right away. She simply sat beside him and took out a pencil, handing it to Evan. I brought your sketchbook. Evan looked down at it in his lap. On the last page was the unfinished drawing of Pico and Logan resting side by side. I keep thinking, he began quietly. What if he doesn't wake up? Leona didn't respond at first. Then she said, You know, I lost my husband when I was younger than you are now. Evan turned surprised. He was in the Navy. She continued, eyes distant but calm. There was a rescue mission. His ship never came back. And for a long time, I stopped drawing. I didn't see the point in capturing anything when the world felt like it was unraveling. Evan didn't interrupt, but then one day she said, I was watching a sparrow build its nest in the middle of a thunderstorm. It was shaking, soaked, probably scared, but it just kept going, twig after twig, breath after breath. And I thought, maybe I can start again too. She gestured to his sketchbook. Drawing helps us remember, but it also helps us survive. Evan lowered his gaze to the page, then began adding soft strokes to Pico's ears, adjusting the curve of his tiny back. An hour passed, then another. Finally, Rachel stepped into the garden, her scrubs flecked with pale smudges. Evan jumped to his feet. He made it, Rachel said with a smile that softened every hard line on her face. It wasn't easy. We had to remove a piece of infected tissue, and one leg will always be a little stiff. But he's awake, and purring. Evan blinked fast, tears gathering before he could stop them. Can I see him? Rachel nodded. He'll be groggy, but I think he'll want to see you. Inside, Pico lay on a warm heating pad in a small recovery cage. A soft pink bandage covered his rear leg, but his eyes lit up when he saw Evan's face. A faint rumble, more vibration than sound, came from his chest. Evan pressed his forehead gently to the cage. He's not just a cat, Evan whispered. He's family. From that day on, things changed, slowly but surely. Evan, once the quiet boy who watched more than he spoke, began to share his sketches with other kids. He even helped Gracie Lopez's sketch club host an outdoor art show at the community center, where they sold animal portraits to raise money for rescue supplies. Leona joked that he'd become a local celebrity, but in truth, she saw something deeper, a light returning to a child who had once carried silence like armor. Pico grew stronger each week. Though he walked with a slight tilt, it never slowed him down. He followed Evan everywhere, down trails, through backyard gardens, even into the school library. With special permission, Pico became the unofficial emotional support animal of Millersville Elementary, curled beside Evan during reading hour like a golden-furred guardian. Leona, too, had changed. She now opened her home every Thursday for Sketch and Share afternoons, where children and retirees alike came to draw, share stories, and sip lemonade. The walls of her studio began filling with new drawings, some hers many, Evan's others contributed by tiny hands, still learning to trust their lines. And through it all, the scars remained not just on Pico's leg, but in the memories of the storm, the cries in the rain, the fear of not being believed. But the smiles stayed longer, and the laughter came more easily. Spring came early to Millersville that year, as if the earth itself had been inspired by the quiet heroism of its people. Daffodils bloomed along cracked sidewalks. Birds returned to rebuild their nests beneath rain gutters, and the Cedar River, once swollen and wild, flowed now with a calm, glimmering rhythm. In the heart of town, the Millersville Community Center, an old brick building with ivy crawling up its sides, was transformed. Its wooden floors had been scrubbed clean, and fresh streamers of yellow and soft green hung across the windows. A hand-painted sign taped to the front door read, "One Storm, Many Hearts, Youth Art Exhibit." Inside, a crowd had gathered. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes drawn to the colorful array of drawings, watercolors and sketches pinned carefully along every wall. The scent of lemonade and sugar cookies hung gently in the air. At the center of the room stood Leona Carter, dressed in a long indigo dress with specks of charcoal still smudged along her fingertips. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen grief and growth walk hand in hand. This exhibit she began, her voice steady, was created by the children of Millersville, not just to remember what we faced, but to celebrate what we chose to become. Scattered among the crowd were familiar faces: Donna from the deli, still smelling faintly of cinnamon and flour; Troy McGraw in his station uniform, a child clinging to his pant leg; and Dr. Rachel Nguyen, arms crossed, trying to look casual, despite the glassy sheen in her eyes. Near the front row sat Mrs. Charlene Holloway, an elderly black woman in her 80s, with tightly braided white hair and a wide-brimmed straw hat. She had been Millersville's librarian for over 30 years, and had once taught Leona art history in high school. Her hands, once nimble with ink stamps and binding glue, now trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses. These drawings, Charlene whispered to the woman beside her, they speak louder than words. At the back of the room, standing slightly apart but glowing with quiet pride, was Evan Moore. He wasn't the boy who had once walked silently past houses with his head down. He stood tall now, a simple navy button-up shirt tucked neatly into his jeans, his sketchbook clutched under one arm like a badge of honor. Pico sat curled in a canvas sling across Evan's chest, wearing a tiny felt bandana around his neck, with the letters HOPE stitched across it. As the guests moved through the exhibit, murmurs of admiration filled the room. One painting depicted the Cedar River in its wildest moment, brushstrokes bold and chaotic dark blues crashing into muddy reds. Another showed a line of townsfolk holding hands along the riverbank, the silhouettes simple but powerful. There was even a watercolor of Logan the shepherd dog, his notched ear lovingly exaggerated, lying under a sunbeam. But it was Evan's piece that silenced the crowd. Hung in the center of the main wall, framed in driftwood and glass, was a pencil and ink drawing titled After the Storm. In it, a young boy knelt in the mud, his hands outstretched to a trembling kitten. Around them, people of all ages and shapes formed a circle holding rope blankets, baskets, food. No faces were detailed, but every figure seemed alive with motion and unity. Above them, all branches from a great oak arched like wings. The caption beneath the drawing read, "It wasn't just the flood that changed us, it was what we did after." Leona approached Evan quietly. "You were brave," she said. Evan didn't look away. "So were you." Gracie Lopez tugged at Leona's sleeve, next holding a clipboard with donation pledges. "We raised over $300 today," she said excitedly. "That's enough for New Crate's vet meds and art supplies. Can we make this a thing?" asked Caleb, the youngest of the sketch kids, waving a popsicle stick banner that read, "Draw to Heal." Leona smiled. "I think it already is." Outside the community center, sunlight spilled across the town square, where a small makeshift sculpture of Pico, built by local woodworker Mr. Emmett Jones, had been placed near the fountain. Emmett, a burly man in his 60s with a weathered face and a heart of gold, had once said he didn't understand art, but couldn't stop himself from carving the kitten's likeness after hearing the story. Children now placed flowers around its base. A chalkboard nearby let visitors write their own messages. Among them, "Thank you for reminding us we're stronger together. For the ones who can't ask for help. Pico made us believe." As dusk settled and lanterns flickered on, Leona stood beside Evan on the steps of the center, watching as neighbors lingered, talked, and laughed. "You know, she said this used to be a quiet town." Evan glanced up. "Do you miss that?" Leona chuckled. "Not one bit." From behind them came a flash. Gracie had taken a picture. "I want to draw this moment later," she said, grinning. "It's like the end of the beginning." That night, Evan placed Pico gently on his pillow and stared out the window at the stars tracing the constellations with his finger. His town had changed. He had changed. But most importantly, something invisible had been passed from person to person, a quiet courage, a shared purpose, and the belief that small hearts could move rivers. And just like that, the story of a boy and a kitten became more than just a memory. It became a promise, one that would hang on the walls of Millersville for generations. Sometimes the loudest changes begin with the quietest voices. A single small act of kindness can ripple through a town, through a family, through a life. In our busy days, we often walk past the silent cries that need us most, But when we choose to stop, listen, and care, we build something stronger than rescue. We build a community. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below. Have you ever witnessed a small moment that changed everything? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that touch the heart.